The day my husband left began like any other, and yet it did not end like any other. I remember it as a collection of quiet things. His wedding ring lay in the sugar bowl, as if it were just another small, sweet thing to be scooped up without thought. A half-cold cup of tea sat by the window, the steam long gone, the spoon resting like a gentle sigh. And the front door was left a little open, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to invite the wind. If you are here with me, thank you for keeping me company. Before I begin, I'm going to say this the way I would to a friend settling in beside me at the kitchen table. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I like knowing where you are. It helps me feel less alone as I tell this. There is a special kind of ache when someone leaves without goodbye. It is an ache made of questions and the weight of unsaid words. There is no slammed door to push against, no last fight to replay, only the hush of a house trying to make sense of a new emptiness. The sugar bowl was a thrift store find, white with a little blue stripe. We used it every morning. That day, his ring looked too heavy for it, like a small stone in a soft place. I want to speak gently to you, the way I wish someone had spoken to me then. I want to say what happened and also how it felt in the quiet hours when the porch light glowed and I waited. My husband vanished without a word. Months later, he stood on my porch again, but he wasn't alone. He returned with a small child whose name I did not know, a secret child I had never heard about. This is a story about hurt and mercy, about boundaries that protect and kindness that heals. It is about the way a family can change shape and still hold love. So if you have a little time, sit with me. I will pour a fresh cup of tea, and I will tell you about us from the beginning. I will tell you about the small house, the garden, the way the sky turned pink over the porch. I will tell you about the last ordinary day when nothing warned me that a door would be left ajar and a ring would sleep in a bowl of sugar. Before the day I found his ring in the sugar bowl, our life was small and gentle. We lived in a little house with white siding that needed a touch of paint and a porch that groaned in one spot when you stepped on it. Out front, I grew a tidy strip of herbs and marigolds because someone told me marigolds keep the pests away. The kitchen had lemon print curtains I sewed myself, a second-hand table that rocked if you leaned too hard, and a kettle that learned our mornings by heart. Daniel is my husband. He is an electrician with careful hands and a quiet way of moving through a room. When he came home from work, he brought the faint scent of metal and sawdust, and sometimes the simple satisfaction of a problem solved. He would set his tool bag down by the back door and say, "Hey," as if we were pressing play on a scene we loved. I would say, "Hey," back, and we would be home again. We had rhythms that held us, though I did not know then how precious those small things were. In the mornings, I made tea. He liked his with a touch of honey. I like mine plain. He would stand at the counter and read the grocery list I had stuck to the fridge with a lemon-shaped magnet: milk, eggs, coffee filters, bread. He might add light bulbs or batteries in a careful, blocky hand. We were a shared list kind of couple. It felt like a promise. Most evenings after dinner, we would sit on the porch and watch the sky change. Our street was quiet, and the soft sounds of other lives floated past us. A neighbor's dog would bark once, then settle. A bicycle would rattle by, the chain whispering. Sometimes Daniel would tell me about a tricky job he finished, how a wire had been hiding in a wall, how electricity is both simple and stubborn. I would listen, and the nerves from his day would ease out of his shoulders. I worked part-time at the library. It suited me. I liked the sound of pages turning and the way people lower their voices when they step between bookshelves. I liked recommending a gentle story to a tired person and seeing the relief in their face. I would come home with the smell of paper on my hands and stories stacked in my arms. Daniel would laugh and say, "Another stack," and I would say, "There is always room for one more story." On Saturdays, we went to the farmer's market. He carried the bag, and I picked out tomatoes and a loaf of crusty bread. We stopped at the honey stall where a woman with kind eyes always gave us a taste on tiny wooden spoons. Daniel would choose the darkest jar and say, "This one." We would sit on a bench with coffee and watch people greet each other like old friends. Our life had that gentle pace, unremarkable and yet dear. We had a jar on the counter labeled C. It was a silly little thing we did. We put spare change in it and sometimes a $5 bill, and we talked about driving to the coast one day. He said he wanted to show me where the ocean swallowed the sun. I wanted to collect shells and pretend we were new people for just a weekend. The jar was not full, but it made us smile. There was also a room that we called the spare room, even before it was a spare room. There was a time when it was not a room for extra blankets, but a room for hope. There was a time when we traced paint colors on the wall with our fingers and held up sample curtains to the light. We were trying to start a family. We counted days on a little calendar and laughed when we got it wrong and held our breath when we thought we might have it right. Once we thought we had it. I will not tell you a hard story in hard words because I know some of you may carry the same kind of quiet ache. I will only say there was a morning when I put my hand on my belly and felt full of light, and a day, not long after, when the light went out. We sat side by side in a room that smelled of soap, listening to a clock tick too loudly. When we left, the sun was too bright. We held hands and did not say much. He said, "We will try again," and I nodded, because what else do you say when you want something so dear? Grief settled between us, not like a storm but like a quiet river. It ran through our days. Some mornings I would stand at the sink and stare at the cup in my hands, and my mind would feel far away. Some evenings he would sit on the back step longer than usual, his head bowed, his hands clasped. We were gentle with each other. We were careful. We did not always know what to say. I folded the tiny clothes we had bought too soon and placed them in a box. I wrote "later" on the top with a thick black marker. I put the box on the highest shelf in the closet, where it would not catch my eye every time I reached for a sweater. The room became a place for blankets and winter coats, and in time, an extra chair. But sometimes, when I opened the door, I could still see what it almost was. In that season, I held us the way you hold a fragile cup, with 2 hands and all your attention. I cooked simple meals and sat with him when he looked tired and tried to laugh at the smallest things. I brought home a book about hope and left it on the nightstand, not as a hint, just as a gentle lantern. He kept it there. He did not read it as far as I could tell, but he did not move it either. My best friend Leela checked in on me every few days. She has a warm laugh and a way of saying truths without making them sting. She would drop by with a bag of groceries and say, "I bought you the good butter, no arguments." She listened when I needed to talk, and she listened when I did not. Once, when I stood in the garden with dirt on my hands and tears I could not explain, she said, "Grief is not a straight line. Let it be messy." I nodded and felt, for a moment, less alone. Our neighbor, Mrs. Hart, lived across the street with a cat that watched the world from the front window like a tiny supervisor. She is an older woman with a gentle step and a steady gaze. Sometimes she brought soup, the kind that tastes like someone has been stirring it for a very long time with a thoughtful spoon. She would set it down and say, "No need to return the jar. I know where you live." And then, as she lingered on the porch, she'd add, "Let grief have a chair at the table, dear heart." Not the whole table. On Sundays, my mother called. She has a practical kindness that could carry you through a storm. "Are you eating?" she would ask. "How is Daniel? Did you rest?" She told me about the birds at her feeder and a neighbor's new grandbaby and a recipe for lemon chicken she wanted me to try. Before she hung up, she always said, "I'm proud of you. Be gentle with yourself and with each other." I would say, "Love you," and she would say, "Love you more," the way she has since I was little. Life kept going in its ordinary ways. The porch light clicked on at dusk. The kettle sang every morning. Daniel changed a squeaky hinge and tightened a loose cabinet handle. We argued sometimes over simple things like socks left on chairs and the right way to stack plates, the kind of arguments that end with a sigh and a small smile. We watched a storm roll across the sky one night and counted the seconds between lightning and thunder. We liked to guess if the next flash would be closer. There was nothing in those days that felt like the edge of a cliff. There was no sharp warning. The week before he left, we made plans for a Sunday drive to the lake. He held my hand in the hardware store and asked if I liked the new porch light fixture. We bought it and joked about how many lights 2 people need. "As many as it takes," he said, "to find your way home." I loved him for that. The last ordinary day arrived with sunlight and the smell of toast. I burned it. I did that sometimes because I got lost in thought while buttering the pan, and the bread went dark too fast. Daniel waved the smoke away with a dish towel and laughed, a real, warm laugh that rolled through the kitchen. "We need a new toaster," he said. I said, "Or I need to pay attention." We made eggs and ate at the wobbly table, and he balanced it with his foot the way he always did. He stood by the door, tying his boots, and said, "I'll pick up milk on the way home." I looked at the list on the fridge and added coffee filters beneath milk and apples, and I held up the pen like a conductor's baton. "And coffee filters," I said. He saluted me with a grin. "Yes, ma'am, milk and coffee filters." He kissed my cheek. It was the kind of kiss you hardly think about because it happens every day. I remember the warmth of it now. After he left, I watered the marigolds and the herbs. Mrs. Hart waved from across the street, and we talked for a minute about the weather and how the dahlias were having a good year. I went to the library for my shift and checked in new books, straightened a shelf, and showed a little girl where the dragon stories were. Leela texted me a picture of her new houseplant and asked if I wanted to come over that weekend to repot it. I wrote back, "I'll bring cake." I came home in the afternoon and opened the kitchen window to let the air move. The kettle rattled a little as the water boiled. I made tea and tidied the counter and hummed a tune that had been playing on the radio at work. I set out 2 cups because that is what my hands knew to do. The house felt normal. Quiet, but not empty. Like a pause before the next line in a song you have sung 1,000 times. When evening came, the porch light clicked on by itself, the way Daniel had set it to do, just as the sky turned a soft blue. I set the table for 2. There was soup on the stove and bread on the cutting board. I checked the clock and thought about how long it takes to stop for milk at the store on the corner. I did not worry. Not yet. This was still the day when everything was as it had always been. He came home a little after 7. He set the milk on the counter and kissed the top of my head. He looked tired, the kind of tired that rolls in after a long day but not the kind that steals your smile. We ate soup and broke bread and talked about nothing heavy. "How was work?" I asked. "Busy," he said, "but fine." He asked me about the woman at the library who always returned her books with a ribbon inside. We made up stories about who she might be. After dinner, we sat on the porch and watched the light fade. He reached for my hand, and I let our fingers rest together. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime sang a few notes. When the air grew cooler, we went inside and watched a nature show about whales. He fell asleep with his head tipped back, and I paused the show and tucked a blanket around his shoulders. I stood there for a moment and looked at the person I loved, fast asleep in the glow of our small home, safe and ordinary. I did not know I was looking at the last ordinary day. I did not know the sugar bowl would hold a ring soon, or that the porch light would become a beacon I checked every night with a new kind of hope. That night, I turned off the lamp and we went to bed, our breaths slow and even. The world held. At least, that is how it felt. It did not happen all at once. It came like a soft change in the air, the kind you might miss if you are not paying attention. At first, it was a few late nights at work. He would text, running behind, and I would say, "Be safe." I set a plate in the oven to keep warm and turned on the porch light a little earlier. He started wearing a new cologne. It was not strong, just different. I noticed it when I hugged him hello. It was clean and sharp, not the warm cedar he used to like. Our dinners grew quieter. We still ate together. We still passed the salt and asked about each other's day. But the sound of our forks was louder than our words. The TV stayed off more often. He stared at his plate, and I watched the way the light hit the table. His phone began to live face down on the counter. It had never been a secret between us. Before, it would lie anywhere, screen lit, messages popping up about work or a silly group chat. Now it was a small, dark thing. It made me feel like a person on the far side of a closed door. I asked him gentle questions. I tried not to sound like I was digging. "Are you tired?" I would say, like a hand held out. "Just a long day," he would answer, and then smile to make it softer. The words were true, but they were not the whole truth. I could feel that. One evening, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. It was for a coffee shop across town that we never went to, not because it was far, but because it was not on our way. 2 coffees and a slice of cake. I folded the paper and put it back where I found it. That night I made him tea and set it beside him. He said thank you and rubbed his eyes. He was still kind. He still fixed the loose hinge on the bathroom cabinet. He still leaned his shoulder into mine on the couch. He held my hand sometimes when we crossed the street. But there were days I could not find him in the same room. It is strange to feel alone when someone you love sits 3 feet away. One Saturday, while I washed the kitchen floor, the scent of the new cologne drifted from the hall, and my heart felt like it stumbled. I stood there, holding the mop, thinking about how every small thing can be a clue when you are afraid. Then I shook my head and went back to scrubbing. I told myself not to borrow trouble. At the library, I shelved books and smiled at people. I listened to their soft voices and found them what they needed. For a few hours, quiet was a comfort again, not a weight. I came home with a stack of stories and a bag of apples. The house smelled like lemon dish soap and our life. Sunday evening, I tried to open a conversation. We sat at the table with our cups of tea. "Daniel," I said, and then I paused because I did not want to start in a way that would make him defensive. "I've noticed you seem far away lately." He looked at his hands and nodded. "Work, been a lot," he said. I nodded too. "Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head a little. "Not tonight." We went to bed and lay on our backs, looking at the ceiling. Our breaths were slow and even, but I was awake. I could feel the space between us, a hand's width, like a small, cold river. I crossed it with my arm and touched his shoulder. He turned toward me and tucked me close. I fell asleep like that, warmed by the old comfort of us. A few days later, I suggested counseling. It was after dinner. We had washed dishes side by side, our movements smooth and known. I turned off the water and dried my hands. "Maybe we could talk to someone," I said, "just to have help with the tough parts." He leaned on the sink and looked at the floor. "Yeah," he said, slow. "Maybe," he nodded. He did not make an appointment. The weeks went on. The late nights were more often. He started to say, "I'm doing a side job," like it was a good thing, extra money, a man working hard. I said, "Be careful," because I did not know what else to say. He slept less. He drank more coffee. He began to leave earlier, too. I found another receipt, this time for a pharmacy near that same coffee shop. I told myself it was nothing. People buy toothpaste wherever they are. The mind is good at telling stories that make things easy. I was trying to be kind. I did not want to accuse. I did not want to break something that might not be broken. The phone lived face down all the time now. When it lit up, he turned his body slightly away, like he was hiding a small flame from the wind. He did not stay on calls in front of me. He would step outside and talk under the porch light, his breath a pale cloud in the cooler air. When he came back in, he would smile and say, "Work." I began to write him little notes. "Have a good day. Drive safe. Your lunch is in the fridge." I left them by his keys or tucked them into his jacket. He said thank you when he found them. He kissed my cheek. For a moment, our old life would flash bright, and then the quiet would return like fog filling a field. One night, I reached across the couch and took his hand. "I miss you," I said, not accusing, just nomming the truth I felt. He looked at me and his eyes were damp. "I'm here," he said. I nodded. "I know, and I miss you." He opened his mouth like he might speak a long sentence. Then he closed it and pulled me close. I rested my head on his chest and listened to his heart seem careful. Leela saw me at the market and asked how I was. I said, "Fine," and then I said, "Not fine," and then I laughed at myself because both were true. She put a hand on my arm. "Do you want to talk?" she asked. "Not right now," I said. "Maybe soon." She nodded. She bought me a cinnamon roll and pressed it into my hand. "Sugar helps," she said, and we both smiled at the simple comfort. Mrs. Hart waved at me from her porch with her cat in the window. "Your marigolds are still brave," she called. "They are," I said. I wanted to tell her everything and also nothing at all. She seemed to know. "My kettle is on most afternoons," she said. "Just so you know." I said, "Thank you," and it felt like someone had put a soft blanket over my shoulders. As the days shortened, our house grew dim earlier. I turned on the small lamp in the living room and the light made a warm circle. I hoped it could hold us. He came home late, tired, and let his tool bag slide to the floor. I made tea. He stood at the window and looked out at the dark street. His shoulders twitched like he had been holding something heavy all day. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He took a deep breath. "Just a long day," he said, the words familiar now, a gentle wall between us. I nodded. I said, "Okay," because pushing harder did not feel right. We sat on the couch and watched a program about mountain climbers. I thought about thin air and careful steps. The night he left did not announce itself. It came wrapped in ordinary things. We ate a simple dinner. He washed the dishes. I dried. He took out the trash. I wiped the table. He said, "I'm going to shower," and I said, "Okay." The water ran. The mirror fogged. I folded laundry on the bed. He came out in a clean t-shirt and kissed my forehead. "I might step out for a bit," he said. "There's a thing I need to check on." I looked up. "Do you want me to come?" I asked, even though I guessed the answer. "No," he said. "It's quick." He smiled like that would make it easy. He put on his coat and boots and picked up his keys. I watched him stand by the door and look around the room like he was making sure he had what he needed. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that I could not read. He said, "See you soon." I said, "Okay, be safe." He left. The door clicked shut. I set the folded shirts in a neat stack. An hour passed. 2, I texted, "You okay?" The message stayed delivered, not read. I called, no answer. I told myself he was driving. I turned on the porch light and stood there for a minute, listening to the night. A neighbor's wind chime played a few soft notes. A car passed at the end of the street. I made tea. I did not drink it. Near midnight, a draft moved through the hall. I stood up, a little confused, and walked to the front door. It was not closed tight. It was open a finger's width. I felt a quick, cold fear. I closed it gently and turned the lock. I walked back to the kitchen and set my hand on the sugar bowl as if it were a friend. That is when I saw it. His wedding ring lay in the sugar, a small, bright circle on a bed of white. For a second, I did not understand. It was so quiet and simple. I held the edge of the counter because my knees felt loose. I picked up the ring. It was warm from the light above the stove. I stood there, holding it in my palm like a heavy coin, and felt the world tilt. I walked through the house. His coat was gone from the hook. The closet where he kept his boots was one pair emptier. The bathroom had the damp smell of a recent shower, but held no toothbrush of his. In the bedroom, the top drawer of his dresser was open a little, as if someone had pulled it in a hurry and not pushed it all the way back. I called him again. No answer. I texted, "Please call me." I put the ring in my pocket and sat on the edge of the bed. I listened for the sound of his truck. I went to the front window and looked out at the street, gray and still. The porch light made a pale circle on the steps. I waited. The first 48 hours were a blur. I called his sister, Nora. "Have you heard from him?" I asked. "Not lately," she said, and then her voice changed. "Why?" I told her he had left his ring and not come back. She took a breath. "I'll call around," she said. We hung up. We called each other back and forth that day, sharing the same small pieces of nothing. I called the police. I felt strange doing it. I felt like I was making too much noise. The officer on the phone was kind. He asked simple questions. He said, "Come in and file a report." I did. I sat in a chair under bright lights and told a stranger our height, his eye color, what he was wearing, the make of his truck. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I called hospitals. I said his name and asked for the same thing again and again. They said no. They said they were sorry. I drove a few streets he might drive if he wanted to be alone. I went to the coffee shop across town and looked through the window like I might see him sitting there. I did not. The porch light stayed on the whole time. I left it on in the daytime and the nighttime. It felt like a promise. It felt like a small lighthouse at the edge of my life. At the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "He will walk back in. He will say sorry. He will say there is an explanation." I held that voice like a fragile bird and tried to keep it warm. I did not sleep. I lay in the bed with my eyes open and the ceiling a pale darkness above me. I listened to the refrigerator hum and the old pipes sigh. Every car that passed made my heart lift and then drop. I turned the ring in my hand. I did not put it on my finger. The first week was a slow ache. I made meals I did not eat. I set a second plate and then put it away. I made tea and watched the steam rise and vanish. I tried to read, but the words did not make sense. I went to work and returned people's smiles and then sat in my car in the parking lot and cried a steady, quiet cry. At night, I wrote him letters. I wrote them by hand on plain paper. I began with "Dear Daniel," and then I told him about the small light on the porch and the marigolds and the way the house felt bigger without his boots by the door. I told him I was not angry, just afraid. I told him I would listen to whatever truth he brought. I did not send the letters. I folded them and put them in the drawer of the nightstand, where I kept my lotion and a bookmark. "Dear Daniel," I wrote one night, "today I found your old watch under the couch. The battery is dead. I put it on and sat there and listened anyway. There was no tick. The house felt like that. I think you know. Please come home or at least call. I am here. I am not closing the door." Word got around town. It does. People are kind and curious in equal measure. At the grocery store, a woman I knew from the library put a carton of eggs in her cart and said, "I heard, I'm so sorry." I said, "Thank you." And then she hugged me right there in front of the dairy case, and I felt both comforted and a little lost. Another person said, "Men," and rolled her eyes. I did not want to nod or disagree. I wanted to go back to being anonymous in the aisles. Mrs. Hart left soup on the porch. She did not knock. She knew I might not be ready for company. She tied a note to the jar with a piece of string. "No need to return the jar," it said, like always, and then beneath that, "I'm here." Her handwriting was neat and sturdy. I cried a little holding that jar. Leela came and sat with me. She did not ask for the story. She knew that saying the words was like walking barefoot on a rocky path. We sat on the couch and held mugs of tea. She reached for my hand. "You are not nothing without him," she said. You are whole." I nodded because I wanted to believe her. I also wanted to hear his key in the door. I filed a missing person report. The officer took my paper and said they would put it in the system. He asked if Daniel had any reason to leave. I said, "Not that I know." And then I thought of the late nights and the receipts and the new cologne, and I felt like I had left something out. He wrote notes and thanked me. I walked out into the sun and blinked like someone coming up from deep water. I called his work and spoke to a coworker named Mike, a man I had met at a holiday party once. He sounded nervous to hear from me. "He took some time," Mike said. "He said he had something personal." He paused. "He cleared his locker." I held the phone tight. "When?" I asked. "A couple weeks ago," he said. My stomach went cold. That meant he had been preparing to leave longer than I knew. At home, I opened the closet and really looked. A few shirts were gone, not just the one he had worn the day he left. A pair of jeans. The old jacket he wore to fix things. The extra toothbrush was gone from the cup. It was strange, the way absence can be so loud. I realized he had been moving things slowly, like someone carrying water from a well, a cup at a time. A month passed. The days blurred at the edges. I went to work and scanned books and smiled, and then came home and stood in the doorway and listened to the quiet house. I folded laundry and found one less pair of socks to match. I watered the plants and felt the earth under my fingers like a steady truth. I cleaned the kitchen, and the smell of lemon soap made me feel both safe and sad. I kept the porch light on. I told myself it was for safety, but deep down I knew it was for hope. Night after night, that soft, warm glow fell on the steps and the little patch of grass. The bulb had a long life, the box said. I hoped my hope did, too. Sometimes I sat on the top step and watched the sky turn deep blue. I listened to other people come home. People asked me what I would do next. I said, "I don't know yet." It felt honest. I did not file for anything. I did not make big changes. I made my bed in the morning. I peeled apples and made a small pie and brought half of it to Mrs. Hart. I told Leela yes when she asked me to walk by the river. We watched the water move, and I thought of how a river keeps going even when it bends and the banks change. I wrote more letters. "Dear Daniel," I wrote, "the porch light is on. Dear Daniel, your sweater is on the back of the chair and it still smells like your cologne. Dear Daniel, I am angry today and then I am not, and it is strange to hold both. Dear Daniel, I bought a new jar of honey, the dark one you like. It will keep, I think." I folded them all and put them away. I learned the shape of my loneliness. It had a routine. It had a cup of tea and a quiet chair. It had a walk at dusk and a prayer whispered on the porch steps to no one in particular. It had the sound of my own voice when I read out loud to myself, just to fill the air. The house and I became companions. We held each other up. Months later, on a dusk that looked like any other, someone knocked on my door. The porch light was already on, shining steady and warm. I was in the kitchen, rinsing blueberries in a small colander. The sound of the knock carried through the house like a bell. It was not hard or urgent. It was gentle. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. My heart beat a little faster for reasons I could not name. I opened it. Daniel stood there on the step. The sight of him made a quiet sound in my chest, like a string pulled too tight. He looked thinner. His eyes were tired. He held his shoulders like a man carrying something heavy. Beside him stood a small boy. He held a stuffed rabbit by one ear and wore a little backpack with stars on it. He had careful eyes, the kind that take in a room and a person and tuck it all inside. He pressed closer to Daniel's leg, but did not hide. His shoes were scuffed, the way shoes get when someone runs and plays. Daniel looked at me. His mouth opened and closed once. He said, in a voice that broke me and held me at the same time, "This is Eli." My breath left me. I did not know where to put my hands. I nodded because nodding was all I could do. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said, and my voice sounded like it had traveled a long way. They stepped inside. The boy looked at the lemon print curtains. He looked at the cat dish by the back door, empty with a little picture of a fish at the bottom. We did not have a cat, but I had put out water there all summer for the neighborhood stray. It made me feel like I was taking care of something. "Hi, Eli," I said, kneeling a little to be at his height. I did not reach for him. "I'm Anna." He looked at me a long second and then at Daniel. Daniel nodded to him, a small encouragement. The boy held up the rabbit a little, like a hello with soft ears. "Hi," he said, almost a whisper. "Would you like to sit?" I asked. "I have crayons. Do you like to draw?" His eyes lit at that word. "Yes," he said, and the sound of it was like a small bell in a quiet room. "Good," I said. "Come with me." I led them to the kitchen table. I pulled a tin from the drawer. It was the cookies tin that never held cookies, only crayons. I set a stack of paper on the table. Eli climbed onto the chair and set his rabbit on the seat beside him. He picked a blue crayon and drew a line. His shoulders dropped a little, the way a person's does when they feel a small safety. I put the kettle on. It felt like the only thing I knew how to do. The flame made a soft sound. The kitchen smelled like gas and then the clean steam of water heating. I took down 3 cups. I set out honey. I moved in small, purposeful ways so I would not shake. Daniel stood near the doorway with his hands by his sides. He looked at the floor. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. We did not talk yet. There was too much and not enough at once. I poured the boiling water and the echo of the old life, the simple act of making tea, calmed my breath. I set a cup near Eli and said, "It is warm, blow on it if you like." He nodded without looking up. He was drawing a house, a big rectangle with a triangle roof. He added a door and then a window with a cross for the panes. He went back and colored the window yellow. My throat tightened. Daniel and I sat at the table, across from each other. We held our cups but did not drink. The steam rose and disappeared. The clock on the wall ticked the way it always had. The normal sounds pressed gently around a moment that was not normal at all. I took a breath. "How old is he?" I asked, my voice quiet and even. 5, Daniel said. "He turned 5 in the spring." I nodded and looked at the little boy's hands on the crayon. His fingers held it with a familiar kind of grip. "He's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Daniel shut his eyes a second and opened them like he was holding in a storm. I waited. I did not rush him. I did not throw questions at him like stones. He took a breath that was more a shiver. "I am sorry," he said, and I could hear the truth in it. "There is so much to say," I nodded. "We'll take it slow." He looked at Eli. "You okay, buddy?" he asked. Eli nodded, his eyes still on the paper. He drew a little tree with a green top and a brown trunk. He added a bird, a simple V in the sky. I felt the kitchen grow softer. It was a good thing to have a child drawing where hard words were waiting. Daniel began. His voice was steady but low. "Before we were married," he said, "I had a brief relationship." He paused. He looked at his hands. "It was not serious. We were not good together. We ended it. I never knew she was pregnant." My chest hurt in a deep, old place. I nodded. "Okay," I said, because I needed him to know I was listening. He rubbed his thumb along the cup. "A few months before I left, she reached out. She found me through an old friend. She said I needed to know about Eli." He looked at me. I did not believe it at first, or maybe I did. Maybe I just did not want to. He took another breath. "She said she was ill." The kettle had stopped singing, but I could still hear it in my head. I thought of the phone calls on the porch, the new cologne, the receipts. The pieces began to line up, one after the other. "She asked me to meet him," he said. "I said I would." He looked ashamed, not for the meeting, but for what came after. "I did not tell you." I watched the steam fade from his cup. "Why?" I asked, just the one word. He shook his head. "Shame," he said. "Fear. I did not know how to bring a truth like that into our house. I told myself I would tell you after I had answers, after I met him. after I knew what it meant. But every time I thought of your face and of what we had lost, I froze. I nodded slowly. I thought of the room with the box labeled later. I thought of the river of grief between us. I did not say those thoughts out loud. They hung in the air, part of the ache, part of the care. Did you meet him? I asked. He nodded. I did, he said. His eyes went to Eli, who was now drawing a sun in the corner of the page. He held this rabbit then, too. He looked at me and I felt something I did not know how to carry. Daniel put his face in his hands for a second. He did not sob. He breathed like a man dropping heavy weight onto the ground at last. He lifted his head. Her illness got worse, he said. She asked me to help more, to take him sometimes. He swallowed. I did. I started to spend nights there when she needed to rest. I told you I had side jobs. I told myself I was buying time. You could have told me, I said, and my voice was not sharp. It was a soft statement. It was a small stone of truth laid gently on the table. He nodded, eyes wet. I should have, he said. You are the person I should have told. I was a coward. He said the word without drama, like a man numbing the weather. What happened? I asked. That night. He looked at his hands again. She called me, he said. She sounded so tired. She said she thought it was time to bring him to me for longer. She said she had a hospital appointment the next day and could I please come? I went. He paused. I left my ring because I felt like I was leaving one life for another. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself I would be back with an explanation. And then one day slipped into the next. How long? I asked. How long were you gone? He thought. 3 months, he said, as if it could be counted like that, like coins on a table. It felt like a week and a year at the same time. He cleared his throat. She passed away, quietly. A nurse called me at the hospital. She had written my name down. She had written Eli's name and mine on a paper and asked them to call. He closed his eyes. I looked at Eli. He was drawing a second window now. He colored it yellow, too. He did not look up. The rabbit sat with its one ear bent. I imagined his mother's hand tying the backpack straps and kissing his hair. My heart moved toward him on its own. Does he have anyone else? I asked. Grandparents, an aunt. Daniel shook his head. No one who can take him, he said. There's an aunt in another state, but she's not. It's complicated. She cannot. I have papers, he added quickly, like he had been holding that sentence ready. I have legal guardianship. I did it the right way. I've been with him. He looked at me with a kind of pleading that made my chest ache. I should have told you. I didn't know how to come back here and say all these things. I took a breath. The kitchen felt both familiar and strange, like a room in a dream. I looked at Daniel. He looked older. He looked also very young, the way people do when they are ashamed. I thought of all the nights he stood on some porch with his phone in hand, trying to find words and failing. I thought of my porch light shining for someone who did not know how to walk back. What do you need right now? I asked, because that was a question I could hold. He looked surprised. He frowned a little, like he was not sure. Eli needs to eat, he said first, like a father, and sleep. He needs to feel safe. He paused. I need to tell the truth. I need to ask your forgiveness, though I know I have no right to ask for anything more. I nodded once. There were tears on my face, and I did not rush to wipe them. Do you have a place to stay tonight? He looked down. We've been here and there, he said. Friends, a motel once. The word motel hurt more than it should have. It was a hard word for a small boy. Okay, I said. We will figure out tonight. Eli finished his drawing and slid it toward me across the table. He had drawn a house with a light in the window. He had added 3 stick figures, 2 tall ones and a small one in the middle. The little one held each tall one's hand. The sun was there in the corner, shining. He pointed to the window, colored yellow so carefully. Is this home? He asked, his voice small but steady. A long pause moved through me. It was like the space between a question and an answer in school, the space where your heart decides who you are. I looked at his eyes, and I looked at the light in the little paper window, and I felt the porch light at our real window shining on my step. We'll see, sweetheart, I said very gently. We'll find out together. I stood and went to the pantry. I took down a jar of the dark honey. I cut slices of bread and spread a thin layer on each. I set the plate on the table. Would you like some? I asked Eli. He nodded and reached for a piece. He took a bite and smiled with his eyes, not his mouth. That made me smile back without thinking. Daniel sat very still, like a man who knows that moving might break a thing too fragile to touch. I looked at him. "There will be time to talk more," I said. "Not all today," he nodded. "I know," he said. "Thank you." He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand as if he had forgotten how to use a napkin. I passed him one and he took it with a soft, "Sorry." We ate bread and honey. We listened to the stove click as it cooled. The sky outside darkened, and the porch light glowed more brightly in the window. Eli finished his bread and drank a few sips of tea, then set his cup down carefully like someone taught him not to spill precious things. "Is there a bedtime for you?" I asked him. He looked at Daniel. "Soon," Daniel said. "He sleeps early." His voice was warm when he spoke to the boy. It softened everything. "Would you like to wash your hands?" I asked Eli. "Yes," he said. I showed him the little stool by the sink. He stood on it and let the water run over his fingers. He watched the bubbles slide away. He dried his hands on the towel and smoothed it back onto the rack with careful hands. I set a blanket at the end of the couch and a pillow. "You can rest here for a bit if you like," I said to Eli. He nodded. He climbed onto the couch with his rabbit and curled onto his side, a small comma in a sentence we had just begun to understand. He watched me for a moment, then Daniel, then closed his eyes. His breathing evened out like a tide. Daniel and I sat at the table again. The house was very quiet now. "I need to say this," he whispered. "Say it," I said. He swallowed. "I am sorry I left you the way I did. I should have told you. I should have trusted you. I hurt you. I see that. I will do whatever you need me to do now. I am not asking for anything. I am telling the truth because you deserve it." I nodded. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and I meant it. The truth hurt, but it sat easier in the room than the silence had. We were not healed. We were not even close. But we were not in the dark anymore, and that mattered. "What happens next?" he asked, like a man afraid of the answer. I looked at the little boy sleeping on my couch. I looked at the ring in the sugar bowl where I had put it back after I took it out of my pocket many months ago, unable to decide what to do with it. It lay there, a quiet circle in sweet grains. I looked at the porch light glowing steady. "We will think," I said. "We will make a plan that is good for Eli. We will not make big decisions tonight." I met his eyes. "We will not undo the hurt with fast words. We will be careful." He nodded, tears on his cheeks again, quiet this time. "Okay," he said. "Okay." I stood and moved to the sugar bowl. I touched the ring with the tip of my finger, not to pick it up, just to feel the cool metal. It was there like a memory you can't throw away and can't wear either. I put the lid back on and turned off the kitchen light. The porch light spilled its gentle shine into the room. We sat in that soft glow, three people caught in a moment between what had been and what might be. When Eli fell asleep on the couch that first night, I folded the blanket over his small shoulders and watched his hand still hold the rabbit's ear. He had fallen asleep the way children do when they finally feel safe enough to let go. His breath was steady. The porch light made a soft halo on the wall. I turned back to Daniel. There was so much inside me. I chose the simplest truth first. "You cannot just move back in," I said. I kept my voice low. I said it the way I would say, "Please pass the salt," because I did not want the words to cut. I wanted them to sit in the room without breaking anything more. He nodded as if he had expected it and also still hoped for a different answer. "I know," he said. He looked at the floor. His hands were open on his knees. He did not argue. He did not beg. He just took the words and held them. "You may leave Eli here," I added. "For a few nights, not forever, just while you find your feet. He can sleep in the spare room." I glanced at the couch where the boy lay curled like a comma in a sentence. "He needs quiet. He needs calm. I can give him that." I paused. "But you will not stay here." Daniel lifted his eyes. "I understand," he said. He meant it. I could tell by the way his shoulders softened, like a man who knows the rule is fair even if it hurts. "I'll call Nora," he said. "She'll take me in." He breathed out. "Thank you for letting him rest." "Tomorrow," I said, "you bring the papers. I want to see the guardianship. We will make a list of what Eli needs. We will speak to someone who can guide us. A counselor, I'll look for one." I kept my sentences small. I could manage small. He nodded. "Yes," he said, "anything." He stood and looked at Eli again. He bent and touched the boy's hair with 2 fingers, careful not to wake him. Then he pulled on his coat. At the door, he turned back to me. "I'm sorry," he said again, almost a whisper. I nodded. "I know," I said. "Go get some rest." When he left, I locked the door and stood for a moment in the quiet. The house felt both new and very old. I lifted Eli gently and carried him to the spare room. The sheets were clean. The room smelled like cedar from the closet. I tucked the rabbit into the crook of his arm and turned on the little lamp with the soft shade. I sat on the edge of the bed until his breathing fell deep again. In the morning, I made oatmeal with honey and sliced bananas. Eli came into the kitchen in his socks, the backpack on one shoulder like a habit. He watched me with those careful eyes. "Good morning," I said. "Would you like oatmeal?" He nodded. He did not speak much, but when I set the bowl in front of him, he said, "Thank you." It was quiet and clear. "Do you like school?" I asked. He shrugged. He stirred his oatmeal and drew a line in the honey with his spoon. "Sometimes," he said. It was enough. We did not force big talk. We kept to the small things that make a morning. He finished the bowl and set his spoon down neatly. Daniel came with a folder under his arm. He had the papers. He laid them on the table. I read the words slowly: legal guardianship, signatures, dates. A stamp that made it real in the eyes of a building somewhere. It made it real in my kitchen, too. I felt the relief and the ache together. Eli's mother's name on the page was like a soft bell. I sent her a silent blessing. "We should talk to someone," I said. "Someone who can help us build a plan that is good for him." Daniel nodded. "I found a name," I added. "Counselor Mara. She works with families. She is kind. People say she listens well." He looked relieved. "I will go," he said, "but you first if you want." I did want. I needed a place to lay down what I had been carrying. We called Nora, and she came over with a bag of groceries and a worn sweater for Daniel. She hugged me on the porch. It was the kind of hug that says, "I'm here, and also I'm sorry for my brother all at once." "You are good," she said into my hair. "You have always been good." I shook my head. "I'm just trying to be steady," I said. She nodded. "That is the same thing." We sat at the table and spoke in low voices while Eli drew another house with a yellow window. Nora agreed Daniel would stay with her for a while. Daniel gave me a small list of Eli's routines. Bedtime. A song he liked. The way he liked the edges of a sandwich cut off. He spoke about the boy in a careful way, as if he knew each detail mattered. That afternoon, I called Counselor Mara. Her voice on the phone was warm. "Come tomorrow," she said. "Come alone first." I felt the floor under my feet a little more solid. When we met, her office felt like a small living room. A soft lamp, 2 chairs, a plant in the corner that looked happy to be alive. She poured tea and waited until I was ready to speak. When I told her the story, I did not rush. I watched the steam and let the words come out in their own time. I did not cry until the very end. She listened with her whole face. She did not try to fix the pain. She said gentle things like, "That sounds heavy, and you are allowed to hold 2 truths, and you can be kind and you can have boundaries." I wrote that sentence in my mind. I would write it down in my journal later. "What do you want?" she asked before I left. It was a simple question and it took the breath from me. I said, "I want Eli to be safe. I want to be honest. I want my life to be honest." She nodded. "Those wants can live in one house," she said. "They may not live in the same room. That is okay." I felt something shift inside me just a little. At home, I focused on Eli's small world. I put a basket with crayons and paper on the low shelf. I set a stack of picture books on the coffee table. At bedtime, we kept to gentle routines, a warm bath, pajamas, a story, a soft song. He liked the book about whales we had watched once, the big, slow bodies moving through deep water. "Do whales get lonely?" he asked one night. "Sometimes," I said, "but they sing to each other." He nodded like that made sense. He warmed to me slowly. He watched before he joined. He stood at the edge of the garden and watched me pick basil leaves and then came to help, 1 leaf at a time. He sat close to me on the couch, but did not lean until the 3rd night. He laughed once at a silly voice I gave a character in a story, and then covered his mouth like laughter might be too much. I laughed in a soft way too, to show it was safe. I did not tell him I would be his mother. I did not try to fill that space. I told him my name. "You can call me Anna," I said. He said, "Anna," in a careful way, like he was tasting it. It was enough. I told him where the spoons were and how the porch light turned on at dusk. I told him he could ask me for water in the night and I would not be upset. The first night he did. He whispered from the doorway, "Anna." I sat up. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "Water," he asked. "Of course," I said, and it felt like a small, holy thing to be asked. People in town noticed the small boy beside me. They do. At the grocery store, a woman from the library smiled at him and then looked at me with quiet questions. I kept Eli's story close to my chest. "This is Eli," I said. "He is staying with us for a bit." If someone asked more, I said, "It's not my story to tell," and I smiled to soften the line. It worked. Most people understood and stepped back. Mrs. Hart left a little knit hat for winter on the porch. It was gray with a blue stripe. She did not attach a note. She did not need to. Eli put it on and looked at himself in the microwave door. "Warm," he said, and smiled with his eyes again. I told him, "Mrs. Hart made it. She is the neighbor with the cat." We walked it over together to say thank you. The cat supervised from the window with deep interest. I started to rebuild myself as if I were a house with a good frame that needed care. In the morning, after I dropped Eli at school or after Daniel picked him up, I walked before work. I followed the same loop, past the river where the water moved like a thought and under the maple trees that dropped little red leaves like small hands. I breathed in the air and let my body remember that it could keep going. I began to journal again. I wrote dates and small sentences, not big truths, just, "Today Eli ate all his soup, and I saw a heron, and I do not feel angry this morning, and I do not have to decide everything today." The pages filled with small, honest things. They made a path I could follow. I signed up for a class at the community center, watercolors on Thursday evenings. The teacher spoke gently and said it was not about being good but about seeing. I brought home a painting of a blue bowl with lemons. Leela came over and said she liked it. She stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a heart without making a big deal out of it. We had coffee on Saturdays. We talked about her new plant and my new routine. She asked me how I was and listened to the answer. Sometimes it was, "I am okay," and sometimes it was, "My chest hurts today." Either way, she said, "I'm here." After a few weeks of this new rhythm, I met with Daniel and told him what had been growing inside me, quiet and clear. We sat at a small table in a cafe. It was not the one across town. It was a place where no one knew us. I held my cup in both hands and looked him in the eye. "I am separating from you," I said, not with anger, with clarity. My voice did not shake. It surprised me. He closed his eyes. He nodded. He did not argue. "I understand," he said. He looked at the window. "You are right to do this. I gave you reasons." I took a breath. "I forgive you," I said. "I won't forget. I will not be your wife. I will be steady for Eli." He pressed his lips together and then said, "Thank you for being the light." We told Counselor Mara together. She did not look surprised. She nodded as if a small seed had just sprouted. "We can work on co-parenting," she said. "We can hold Eli at the center, not between you." She gave us simple guidelines. Speak with respect. Share information. Do not use the child to carry messages. Keep routines. Keep promises. If you make a change, say so early. It was not complicated. The practice of it would be the work. We created a plan. Eli would live with Daniel in the small apartment he found a few streets away, near the park with the swings. He would stay with me after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We would do Sunday dinners sometimes, if it felt right. We put the plan in writing with a local mediator so it had edges. We agreed on money in a quiet, practical way. We marked it all on our calendars. Eli's teacher learned our new rhythm. She sent 2 copies of notes home when she could. Daniel and I set up a shared email for school things. We sat together at the little desks on parent night and listened to the teacher talk about reading logs and kindness as a classroom rule. We did not sit too close. We did not sit too far. We were 2 grown people who loved the same small person. It was enough. On Tuesdays, I picked Eli up from school. He ran to me with his backpack bouncing. His rabbit stayed at home now, safe on his bed. We went to the library and he chose books with strong colors and big pictures. I showed him how to check them out. He loved the beeps the scanner made. We walked home and made simple dinners, pasta with butter, carrots with hummus. He liked to help with the salad, tearing the lettuce into small pieces with serious hands. After dinner, we drew. I laid out the crayons and paper and he made worlds. He drew us as stick figures at first. Then he gave me curly hair. I laughed when he explained it. "Your hair is bendy," he said, tracing little loops. He drew Daniel taller with his cap. He drew himself in the middle, holding both our hands, and always he drew a little square house with a light in the window. Sometimes the light was in my house, sometimes in Daniel, but the light was always there. On Thursdays, we cooked pancakes for dinner. It felt like a small holiday. He liked to stir the batter and watch the bubbles rise. I showed him how to wait for the edges to set before we turned the pancake. We ate them with honey. Sometimes I cut one into a heart with the edge of a cup. He pretended not to notice and then smiled big. Sundays grew gentle. Sometimes Daniel came over and we ate together. We kept the table talk simple. How was your week? What did you build? What did you read? We laughed at the same small jokes. When dinner was done, Daniel took Eli home. I stood at the door and watched them walk to the truck. I turned the porch light on, not for them to return, but because the world felt kinder with it lit. There were hard conversations. There always are. There was a day when Daniel asked, "Do you think ever later we could try again?" He spoke as if the words might break in his mouth. I put my hand on the table and made it steady. "No," I said gently. "I am not going back. This is not a punishment. It is a boundary." He nodded and looked away. He came back to center. "Okay," he said, and he meant it. We let the quiet sit. It did not hurt us. There were also small kindnesses that did not need words. When Eli had a fever, Daniel texted me and I drove over with soup. I did not stay long. I sat on the edge of the couch and felt his warm forehead and told him a short story about a boat sailing on a calm lake. When my car battery died, Daniel came by and jumped it. He did not come inside. He waved and drove away. We kept each kindness small and clean. It worked better that way. My mother visited. She sat at the kitchen table and listened to everything. When I told her I had filed the divorce papers months after the dust had settled, she reached across and held my hand. "I am proud of you for choosing the truth," she said. "I know this is not what you dreamed. You are still whole." We baked lemon chicken and took half across to Mrs. Hart. On a quiet afternoon, I put Daniel's ring in a small wooden box. It was a box I had found at a yard sale years ago. It smelled like cedar. I placed the ring on a piece of soft cloth and closed the lid. I did not feel anger. I did not feel relief. I felt a simple kind of respect. That ring belonged to a promise I had kept until I could not alone. It would not sit in the sugar bowl anymore. It would rest. The seed jar stayed on the counter. I emptied it and washed it clean. I started again, not for a trip this time, but for small things. Good crayons. A bus pass for a day at the museum. A new porch light bulb. Once, when the jar grew half full, I took Eli to the coast with Leela. We walked the beach and picked up shells. Eli ran ahead and waved at the water like it was a person he knew. We ate sandwiches with sand in them and laughed. The sun sank into the sea the way Daniel had once promised to show me. I watched it with quiet gratitude for the life I had and the child who had made me look up. Counselor Mara saw me every other week for a while. We talked about grief as a river that does not disappear but changes course. We talked about trust as something that could become compost, feeding new growth. She smiled at my watercolors. She asked me where I felt strong in my body, and I said, "In my feet." She smiled. "Keep walking," she said. The town learned our shape. People stopped asking questions and began to say hello to Eli by name. The librarian put aside a pile of picture books about boats and birds and a child with a rabbit. At the market, the honey seller saved the darkest jar for us. She watched Eli lift the tiny wooden spoon with care and said, "You have good hands." He smiled with his eyes again. One evening, after story time, Eli looked at me and said, "Are you my mom?" The question sat between us like a small bird that had flown in by mistake. I took a breath. "I am Anna," I said. "I am the person who will always be gentle with you. I will help take care of you. Your dad is your dad. Your mom loved you. She cannot be here. I can be here." He looked at the blanket, then at me. "Okay," he said, and put his head on my arm. We did not need more. Slowly, trust moved from what we had lost to what we were building. Not husband and wife, something else. Two grown people who respected a child's needs. We spoke in simple sentences. We checked in on the weather and the homework and the shoe sizes. We used a calendar to plan the days. We kept the promises we made, even the small ones about pickup times and the kind of cereal to buy. We made a home not under one roof, but under the same sky. One afternoon, Eli brought me a new drawing. He had used the good crayons. He had pressed hard so the colors were sure. He had drawn 3 figures, me with curly hair, Daniel tall with a cap, and himself in the middle, holding both our hands. Above the little house, he had drawn a small square with yellow rays coming out like a tiny sun. I pointed. "What is that?" I asked. He grinned. "The porch light," he said, "so everyone knows it's safe." I taped it to the fridge. The lemon print curtains moved a little in the breeze from the open window. I poured tea. I stood in my kitchen and felt something like peace. It was not the life I had planned. It was a life I could trust. Life now is quieter and clearer. My days have a simple rhythm that holds me. I wake to the sound of the kettle and the birds. I walk by the river and feel my feet on the earth. I come home and open the windows and let the light in. The house has a new heartbeat. It does not race. It does not ache the way it did. It is steady. There are crayons in a basket and small shoes by the door sometimes. There are Tuesdays and Thursdays with a boy who asks big questions with small words. I keep the porch light on some nights, not for Daniel anymore, not for anyone in particular. I turn it on as a sign to myself, a reminder that this is a house where warmth is offered, a place where you can tell the truth and still be welcome. The wedding ring rests in a small wooden box on a high shelf. It is not a wound now. It is an object with a story. It reminds me of the vows I kept, and of the moment I understood I could keep a different kind of promise to myself. It is proof that love can be real even when it changes shape. Sometimes, on Sundays, Daniel brings Eli for dinner. We eat simple food. We talk about homework and basketball and the cat in Mrs. Hart's window. When they leave, I stand on the porch with my hand on the rail. I watch them drive away and feel both soft and strong. I go back inside and turn the porch light on for whoever might need it next. I still go to watercolor class. I still write in my journal. I still visit the ocean when the sea jar fills enough for gas and a sandwich. I put shells in a glass bowl on the mantel. When the sunset comes, I turn the lamp off and watch the light fold itself into evening. I think of whales and their songs. I think of how they find each other in deep water. To you, listening to me now, thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for letting me place this story in your hands. If you feel alone on your porch some night, with a light on and a question in your heart, I want you to know you are not the only one. We can love without losing ourselves. We can forgive without going back. We can choose kindness and boundaries together. When a heart breaks, it does not become smaller. It becomes a bigger home for truth. It becomes a place where more light can live. It becomes a porch with a lamp that says, "Safe here," even on the dark nights. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you want to be part of this small circle, you can subscribe and share these stories with someone who needs a soft voice. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps me feel close to you. May your evening be gentle. May your porch light be steady. And may your heart find the shape that fits the truth you are living now.